Library. Mr. Bill Konigsberg. He is an author of lots of different young adult books, as well as a sports writer, and he's here to talk to us about his books and what it's like to be an author, and anything. If you have any questions, you can feel free to address them, but let's go ahead.
Great, well, thanks. It's nice to see you. And when it's a smaller group, what I like to do is just make it a little bit more of a conversation. So I'll tell you some about me and my journey to where I went in my life as a writer, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit. And there's always time for questions, and that includes you. If you'd like to ask a question, please feel free. So my name is Bill Konigsberg, and I was born in New York City in a different century. No, I'm kidding. I was born in 1970, and so I came of age at a very, very different time than it is right now. When I started to figure out that I liked other boys, I had no frame of reference for that. I didn't really know. All I knew, and even though I lived in New York City, this is the truth, I knew nobody who was gay. There was nothing on television with anybody who was gay, and if they ever did have somebody, it was as the butt of a joke. It would be a stereotype about somebody, and I didn't relate to any of that. I thought there was something wrong with me. I just thought, well, this doesn't make sense because I like sports, and I'm a guy, and I like other guys, and that doesn't exist. Like, that's truly how my brain felt about all this. I remember going to my school library when I was about 16 years old, and sneaking over to the card catalog, which doesn't exist anymore. So when I was in school, there was an actual card catalog, and you'd like pull it out and look up whatever you were looking for. So I remember looking under homosexuality and having another word in my head just in case somebody came by. And so I'd tell them I was looking for horticulture. And there were only, I think, 3 entries for homosexuality. One was an encyclopedia, and 2 were magazines they had in the periodicals room, and those magazines were like People magazine and Newsweek doing articles about this disease that was killing gay men in New York City. That's all that I knew. So I read those articles. It was petrifying. And then I went to the encyclopedia, and what I learned that day was that my school, it was unfortunate that my school hadn't updated their encyclopedia since 1970 something, because this was a book from 1971, and you may not know this, Lee, but before 1972, the American Psychological Association actually considered homosexuality a mental illness, which is completely wrong, but it took a very, very long time to change that. So when I looked at the 1971 thing, I found out that day I was, that I had a mental illness. And then I went to lunch, I had no one to talk to about it, and it was extraordinarily isolating. And I remember telling myself, well, I have these feelings, but they're just not acceptable in this world, so I'm going to make them not so. I'm just going to leave those to the side, and that's how it'll be, because I can't be gay. I wonder, Lee, if you've seen enough shows to know how well that goes. Didn't go so great. Things tend to move to the front when they're true. And one thing that's also always been true about me, my mother, who is a psychologist, by the way, don't have an adolescent psychologist as your mother if you're a teenager. Bad choice. But she was always very into communication and telling the truth. And so I had a sense from very early on that I was supposed to tell people what was true about me always. So it was very strange to have this new thing where I wasn't supposed to talk about this one issue. Sooner or later, I realized I couldn't do that, and I started to come out at about 15 and 16. It was very unusual back in the 80s, even in New York, to do that. There was no one else in my hospital, in my high school who was openly gay, lesbian, or otherwise. So it was isolating, and I told my mother when I was 16, and my mother, the psychologist, I said, Mom, I have to talk to you. I was really nervous. I said, I have something to tell you, I'm gay. And she looked at me and she said, no, you're not. And I said, yes, I am. And she said, no, you're not. And I said, Mom, that's denial. And she said, no, it's not. It was denial. But anyway, it was very, very hard, and I learned, and I'll be curious, maybe we can talk a little bit later, I'd like to hear your situation, but what I learned from that moment was that it almost doesn't matter what somebody's political ideology is when it comes to coming out, especially when it's apparent. I think my mom's reaction to that, she was a liberal woman from New York City, she had gay friends. I think what she was reacting to was she had an idea of who I was and who I was going to be. And in 1 second, I changed that completely. And her brain couldn't go there. She's much, much better now. She loves my husband, my partner of 21 years, probably a little more than she loves me. It's a difficult situation.
I can see that happening.
Yeah, he's pretty good. Anyway, so to move forward, I didn't know about any books written for young people that were that had LGBTQ characters. When I was about 18, I found a place called the Oscar Wilde Bookstore in New York, and that was my introduction to the fact that there were books and a whole world of LGBTQ people. And I was enraptured, and that day, it probably saved my life, because I felt so alone, and then I didn't. Then I had books to read. And the only time I found a young adult book with a gay character was I went to college in Ohio, and they had a little, like an LGBT, it was almost like a closet, which is ironic, but it was like a little table where there were books, and there was one book about a high school football player who was gay. And I read it, and it was absolutely terrible. That book is not, I'll tell you in a second what I'm thinking. It was
the ones that were not checked out correctly.
yeah, absolutely. So I'll come back to that in a moment. But I read that book. It was absolutely terrible. It was very poorly written. And I thought, oh, I want to do this. Like, this is what I want to do. And even as I grew up and I started working in sports, I did this, I did that, it always stayed with me that I wanted to write fiction. Out of high school, I went to college and I was an English major. And the school I wound up at called it Literature and Writing. And it was, I remember a teacher saying to me, you can't make money as a fiction writer. And I wish that they hadn't said that to me, because while it's true, it got in my way, and I chose a career path. I chose journalism, which I didn't care about. I just wanted to write, and I wanted a job. So I did that in my 20s. In my 30s, I finally woke up one day and I thought, if I want to write books, I better get started. And that's what I did. I actually went to a creative writing master's program to give myself time to write. And I wrote a book just like that first one I read. That was called Out of the Pocket. It was my version of the gay high school football story. And that was my first novel. And basically, I decided to write the books that I wanted to read when I was a kid. And I know I'm not alone, because every time I say that to other people who write LGBTQ fiction for teens, they say the same thing. It's all about wanting to put forward these books to help the next generation that maybe they didn't have. Although that probably is changing now, because there are so many LGBTQ books for teens. It is wonderful, and there's this incredible diversity that did not exist when I was starting. I was part of the first tour, like bookstore tour, for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender authors, and it was 4 white guys. I kid you not. This is in 2013. That was, even at that time, I was like, this is not appropriate. But that's how it was, and that's how quickly things have changed. By the time we went for a second tour in 2015, we knew better, and so it was a more diverse tour. Anyway, that tour is called the Openly YA Tour, which is named after my book Openly Straight, which is checked out right now. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about my books. I've written 7 novels, and they all have LGBTQ protagonists, except this book, The Porcupine of Truth, which ironically has a straight white male as the protagonist and a close to the protagonist character, a secondary character who is a black lesbian, and it's a friendship novel of these 2 books. Ironically, that book won the Stonewall Book Award. It is the only book award, the only book without a LGBTQ protagonist to ever win the Stonewall Book Award in any category. And I think the reason that it won that is because it's an important book, and I'm going to start with The Porcupine of Truth. You haven't read any of my books, is that right? Okay. I'm going to try to get you interested in reading 1 or 2 of them. But what I tried to do with The Porcupine of Truth was to write a book. I was not interested in religion as a young person. I thought, because all I knew about religion as a young person was that those people hated people like me. And so that was my belief. When I got into my 20s and I started to explore the world, I thought, oh, this is kind of interesting. Like the question of what is God and all of this. Yet there was a part of my brain that was like, that's not for me. That's not my area. I have to stay away. So when I wrote The Porcupine of Truth, it was a little bit of a temper tantrum of me saying, wait, why am I supposed to give up spirituality and religion and let that be only the world of other people? So I wrote that book to reclaim spirituality for LGBTQ folks. It's a book about 2 characters who become very close friends, a straight white male, a gay black female. They wind up going on a road trip, but really it's a road trip to find the truth about what life is for both of them. It's a little hard to explain. But I love that book. I love it because it's kind. I love it because it ends with more questions about what God is than answers, and I hate books that are preachy. So I really like books that ask questions. Toni Morris, a great author, who's no longer with us, always says her job as a writer was to raise questions, not answer them. So I believe in that too. So that was Porcupine of Truth, and I'm glad I wrote that book. I learned a lesson in writing that book, and what I learned was if you want a book to sell a lot, don't make it a complicated thing to pitch. Like you need to, when you write a book, you have to be able to explain it in a couple sentences. And so when anyone says, what's The Porcupine of Truth about? I'm like, do you have a year? I mean, it takes a long time. Hence, I'm not really explaining it to you. But it's a deep and it's a funny book, and it's remained one of my favorite books that I've written. But to go backwards, I wrote a book called Out of the Pocket, which was about a high school football player who has a secret. He's gay. He's a big prospect, and he doesn't want anyone to know because it might ruin his chance of being a college football player. He tells a friend. Never goes well when you tell a friend. The story gets out and it becomes a national story. That book is super outdated now because I wrote it in about 2004 and 5 when there were really no openly gay players in professional sports, especially men. That is no longer the case. There are very few, but there are some. So that book was the first, and then I didn't want to become the guy who only wrote stories about sports and have, next is the gay hockey book and then the gay baseball book. I didn't want to do that. So I came up with an idea for a book called Openly Straight. And I want to tell you a little bit about it because this book is in Hollywood now. They're hopefully working on a movie on this book. It's been around for a while and it's had a lot of popularity for a long time. It is my most popular book. I was starting to write a book that I thought was a comedy. I was going to call it No Place Like Home, and it was sort of like, my idea was like The Wizard of Oz, but gayer. And like it was just going to be some crazy story about somebody leaving home and then finding out that going home was better, right? That was a bad idea, and I have a lot of bad ideas. But I was living in Billings, Montana when I was writing this book, and first of all, don't ever move to Billings, Montana, it's terrible. But one day I went to play racquetball. I was going to say pickleball. Pickleball did not exist yet. And I used to go to a club where you could play racquetball, just pickup games with strangers on Wednesday afternoons. And you might see I wear this ring. This ring I got in 2006 from my then partner of 3 years. We had a civil union because that was all that was available in Vermont. So he saw my ring and he said, "Oh, you're married?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "What's your wife's name?" And a bunch of things went through my head. I'm really struggling on this book that is now called Openly Straight. I don't really know what it's about. But suddenly this person says that and I get annoyed and I think, oh, this is really unfair because now all I want to do is play racquetball, but either I have to come out to this person who may not like this information, or I have to lie to them, and I'm not a liar, and I'm a famous gay person already. I've written a book, I've done all these things. So I lied and I just said, her name is Rachel, and I left racquetball and I thought, got in my car and I thought, what just happened? And it was then that my brain exploded. I thought, oh, this is what my book is about. It's about the fact that there's no such thing as openly straight. That nobody talks about the fact that when you're LGBTQ, they talk about coming out like that's something you do once. It's something you do the rest of your life. You just have to keep doing it. And it's unfair. And so the book was a little bit of me writing it's a fun story about an openly gay boy who lives in a liberal town called Boulder, Colorado. He's openly gay, he plays soccer, there's no problem, his parents are super liberal, but he's tired of being known as the gay kid. Like, that's no longer accurate anymore because now there's never just one kid who's LGBTQ, but at the time that was a thing. We're gonna have to change it for the movie. We're calling it The Kid who came out the first. So he's like the guy who came out in 4th or 5th grade. Anyway, he doesn't want the label to be everything that people know about him, because everyone's like, oh, that's the gay kid. Do you know, there's this other gay kid named Caleb, and people will say, hey, do you know Caleb? So I begin to call Caleb's character as You Know Caleb. So I just wanted to write about this. He goes to an all-boys boarding school across the country to recreate himself without the label gay, and he loves it at first, and then it becomes problematic because he finds out that when you don't talk about who you are up front, without even saying anything that's a lie, you become a liar, and it's unfair. Do you know the term heterosexism? Is that familiar to you? Yeah. So heterosexism is basically the idea that everybody is cis, straight. Basically that's cis and straight. So, I was trying to sort of fight against that. I wound up having to write a sequel to Openly Straight because there's a romance in the book, and it's a lovely romance. And at the end, I don't want to ruin it, but the book is not written the way a romance is supposed to be written. I wrote it as a coming-of-age story about this character, and at the end, I started to get emails from people right away that said, I love you and I hate you, or I love this book, and when it was done, I threw it across the room. So I told my editor, I said, there are some people who are unhappy with the ending of Openly Straight. Can I write a sequel? And she said, please write a sequel. So I wrote a book called Honestly Ben, who's from the love interest's point of view. Ben is a boy who considers himself straight, but fell in love with a gay boy. And basically has to contend with, what if I don't feel like I fit any of the labels? What if the labels don't feel like they fit me? And it's also a popular book of mine. Ben is a fun character. Ben is actually based on like a teenage version of my husband. My husband's not a teenager, he's 60 something. But basically, he talks like, Ben talks like my husband. My husband's sort of like grew up in South Dakota, and he talks like an 18th century butler. It's very weird. He grew up on a farm. It's super weird, and I love it. So Ben is a little bit like that. The New York Times reviewed the book and called Ben taciturn and totally crushworthy. So I got Chuck a shirt that says taciturn and totally crushworthy. It's a little blurb from the New York Times. I've mentioned Porcupine. Music of What Happens is a book about toxic masculinity. It's a love story that takes place in Mesa, which is a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona. And it takes place one summer on a food truck when two boys fall in love while working on a food truck. And it's really about how the messages of toxic masculinity, of people saying, as a man, you have to be strong, you have to be tough, you can never say you have a problem, you have to solve all your own problems, how that falls specifically on gay boys. Because one of my characters is more masculine, one is feminine, and it hits them both in ways that are really unfair. So I enjoy that book. It's a nice romance. That's an actual romance. I wrote it on purpose as romance. The Bridge I'm going to be talking about tonight. The Bridge is about suicide and depression. One of the characters is a gay 17-year-old boy. But that's a bit of a departure, and really quickly, that book is, I would describe this way. A boy and a girl, both 17, meet on top of the George Washington Bridge in New York City. They're both depressed, they're both there to jump. They interrupt each other. Based on what happens the moment that they are sitting, facing each other, 100 feet apart, one leg both over the railing, the world then splits into 4 realities. So there are 4 stories. The first story is what would happen if the girl jumped and the boy didn't. And we go deep into the world of both families, because the girl has made this decision, and we need to see the impact of that decision on the world and how it changes the world. And we want to see what happens to the boy who's made the other decision. After that story ends, we go to the story that's the opposite, where the boy jumps and the girl doesn't. And we get that story. And the third story, we move way into the future, and we meet about 12 people whose lives have been forever changed because neither of these people are alive anymore. And it's really about the butterfly effect, about how we think. In one moment, we might think if we're depressed, no one would care if I'm alive, but how that's a lie, because in fact, I struggled with depression. I'm going to talk about this much more tonight, but I thought as a teenager, it would not matter if I wasn't here anymore. And I can tell you, all these years later, that the world would be different. And it's not because I'm famous, it's because every little interaction that happens in my life changes something. And so, to me, that's super important. I've gotten in a little bit of trouble because people talk about, you have to be really careful while talking about these subjects. I agree, but I have one difference of opinion about it. I do try to offer a trigger warning, which I didn't just do, sorry. But I think it's very important to talk about it. I think we should talk about everything. I think the antidote to depression is connection. I think that it's very important to talk about it, but talk about it completely, so that it doesn't seem sort of like this sexy, interesting thing you could do. It's not, it's brutal, it's awful. So we want to talk about it that way. Anyway, that happens all the time to me. I am the adult who has untied shoes the most in the world. Thank you, Lee. Anyway, finally, my last book was Destination Unknown. And Destination Unknown is about growing up. It takes place in 1987 in New York City. And it's really about where I came from. It's about growing up at the height of the AIDS epidemic and coming of age as a young gay person when there was a disease that at that time had there was nothing you could do about it. It was a death sentence in the 80s. and it was a huge impact on my life, and I really actually dreaded going back there because it brought up a lot of old trauma for me, but I'm really glad that I wrote it. I had to write it not as my own story, but as a different person's story. I could not look at that from my own perspective. We're all different. That's, for me, how it turned out. Anyway, I've prattled on for exactly 27 minutes, so I'm going to stop prattling on. I wanted to just say hello to the young man who came in. What's your name?
Gabriel.
Gabriel, nice to meet you. Welcome. So I hope it's okay, but now that I've talked a little bit, I'd love to open things up. And so if you have questions, let's go there, and then I might ask you all some questions. So are there any questions, anything you'd like to know about becoming a writer, about being a gay writer, about writing LGBTQ books, about anything? Not from you? Okay, that's fine. Anything in the back? No? All right. Yes?
I'd like to start with one, like how you said the Oscar Wilde bookstore in New York City was the one that saved your life.
Yeah.
Have you found one, like now living in Phoenix, have you found something similar in that community?
No, but the world is so different. You know, because the internet exists, you know, bookstores and libraries have changed quite a bit. So I am a big fan of bookstores and libraries. I mean, I think they're super important. But a lot of people never go to bookstores anymore or libraries, which is a shame. So I have found my world, which is important. The only LGBTQ bookstores that I know of in the country, there are about 5 of them. There used to be more, but most of them have closed because oftentimes it's hard to keep a bookstore going in this day and age. But there was one called A Different Light that was in San Francisco and LA and New York, gone. There was Giovanni's Room in Philadelphia, gone. Yeah, I don't think there may not, Oscar Wilde is still open. Now, what else? Anything else come to mind?
Is the Barnes and Noble where you live?
There is definitely a Barnes and Noble, yes. So the cool thing about being an author is that if you go into a bookstore and tell the people at the front that you're an author and to see if they have your books, you can offer to sign them, and bookstores will always let you do that. They're happy to have you sign a book so they can put it out and say it's a signed copy. But once you've signed it, it's like a sale. So it's like I walk into a Barnes and Noble and I'm thinking, ka-ching, 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 ka-ching. It's good. No, but it's actually really nice, and I love to go to bookstore events. I like to hold bookstore events. COVID changed all of that. It's been much less. Before that, I was on the road 7 months a year. Now I'm mostly at home. So. Anything else about this?
You said that you wrote What Kind of Truth about, was that one where you were claiming spirituality? Did you get any sort of, I mean, I know that there's always the risk of getting negative reactions, just anytime you're writing about LGBTQ.
Yeah.
What sort of reactions did you get when combining sort of the two?
I got a lot of positive things from the LGBTQ community because I have a character in it who separates some of the organized religion out there from what they would see as Christianity, for instance, in this case. He says that organized religion is the Walmart of spirituality, and that rankled some people, but I'm all about that. You know, bring it on. Yeah, I think that when you raise questions about religion, a group that has been hurt by religion will show up and be interested in that. The group that has already sent you far away, not so happy about it, and that's just the way it is. And I have been kicked out from giving talks in several houses of worship, you know, and that's just a thing that happens in Billings. I was supposed to do a talk in church, and it was a Catholic church, and so there was an article in the newspaper that said something about my partner. And they decided, somebody complained to the deacon and said, basically, the bishop, excuse me, the bishop and said, we're promoting gay marriage in the church. So they kicked me out, and that's the world we live in. And so we have to know what we're up against. To me, it's all about being authentic. Like, I don't understand where these people think LGBT people are going to go. I mean, if we indeed exist, and I do believe we exist, the choices that they they want us to make would be to get married to a person of the opposite sex. I can tell you, having seen that movie, having known many people who've done that movie doesn't end very well very often. So it just seems like a hypocritical idea. If we exist, why do we not have the same?
Have there been other churches that have reached out positive?
Yeah, there was some wonderful churches. One in Omaha, Nebraska, I had a wonderful visit at. One in New York City, a couple in Phoenix where I live. There are a lot of open and accepting churches, and I am extremely grateful for that, because my character Aisha, who is a lesbian in Porcupine of Truth, has been hurt by religion. And she says at one point, I'm going to paraphrase this wrong, I think the cruelest thing you can do is to tell somebody that God hates them. I agree with that. That is ultimately cruel. And I always say, when anyone says something like that to me, I say, have you asked God? Where do you get this from? So, yes?
Patty, I wanted to say that for our young people here, if you are really wanting to find a book and the library is closed, there is a little free library in front of Olympia Brown Unitarian Universalist Church on 7th Street that is focused on LGBTQ.
Oh, that's
population.
Fantastic. Did you
Yeah.
know about this?
It's wonderful.
Good thing to know.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I mean, and the Unitarian churches are so frequently the ones that stand
Yes.
up.
I'm very proud of our church.
Yeah, you should be. They're wonderful. I've been to several of those churches.
Yeah.
I've always loved my experience.
Wait,
I-
quick plug here, I know that you're aware of but if anyone's watching on the video later after that, we do have an LGBTQ teen book club here at the library. We meet monthly, and over along the wall, I have a cart there of books. They're not part of the library collection, but anyone can borrow them.
Yeah.
All LGBTQ books, anything, I've got picture books, I've got up through YA there, I've got some manga and graphic novels as well.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for that.
And then I thought I'd give you a choice of topics.
Please.
Would you rather talk about the Proud Fierce Papa Bear speech or the Konigsberg Award? Or both?
I will combine them.
Okay.
I will tell you something that I've been through. I think the year was 2019. I was at a place called the National Council of Teachers of English. It's a yearly conference. I've been many times, and I was on a panel about book banning. And I've been on panels like that before, but in 2019, this was becoming a bigger issue. And there was a person on the panel. She was actually a Latina poet, but what the organizers didn't know is she was also a policewoman in Houston. And she had extraordinarily Trumpian views about life. And she started in on books about race, and then on books about LGBTQ characters for young people. And she said some incredibly horrible things. Among them were, she said that gay LGBTQ people are mentally ill, and the way that we know that is that their average lifespan is 39 years, which is not true. It's not true. It's just, if that is a fact that, if it was true, might have been taken from the year 1990 when there was a disease killing gay men. But that's just cruel. Anyway, I took her on at this thing, and I was, I'm a Scorpio. Are you? I am a very nice person. Do not cross me on certain issues. I will stand up and I will say the truth. And I did, and I led the way with our panelists pushing back on this. I had a speech the next night, and there were a lot of people very upset because she hurt there were young people in the audience who were very hurt by the things that she said. So I had a speech. It was supposed to be about the music of what happens. The night before, I tore up my speech. I wrote a brand new one. It was full of fire. And in that speech, I said, you don't come for my kids. I'm a proud Papa Bear, and you don't come for my LGBTQ kids. You don't come for my people of color kids. You don't come for... And that speech got a standing ovation. And what I found out later, I got a call from somebody. I was in my car, and they said, well, I wanted to let you know that there's an award named after you now. Somebody donated money, and they wanted to create the Bill Konigsberg Award that's annual for acts of, I can't remember what the heck the thing is. If you want to look it up, that'd be great. But I remember when I got that call, I was like, I had to pinch myself. Am I dead? I was like, wait, I have an award named after me? Am I going to win the award? Apparently I won the award the first year, and since then, I haven't even been nominated. No. It feels wonderful. It's not, it's funny because it's not, if you were to ask me 3 things about myself, that wouldn't be the one that rings the most authentic to me. I do stand up for people, and I have strong opinions, but I think of myself as very pragmatic and loving and kind, and I think you can be pragmatic, loving, and kind, and an activist. But it's just always struck me as sort of funny that that will always remain. There's the Bill Konigsberg Award.
Do you want me to read what it
Yeah,
is?
please,
Okay.
yeah.
The Konigsberg Award is presented annually to an individual who has acted in selfless advocacy of marginalized youth through the creation, teaching, funding, or other form of promotion of young adult literature. This award was initiated to recognize individuals standing up for groups of young people who are victimized by hate speech or actions. Yeah, that's it.
You know, they used to have a long name for the award that was something about acts of activism or towards equity and inclusion. I don't see that anymore. I think they've rewritten it, and that's fine, because I could never remember it anyway. No, it's wonderful to have that in existence. It's certainly something I believe in. So, what can let me ask you, are you a reader then?
Mm-hmm.
What do you like to read?
Anything.
Anything. Give me a genre though. Do you like sci-fi, fantasy?
Mainly graphic novels.
Graphic novels. Did you read the one by Alice Oseman, the Heartbreakers, that was made into the TV show? No? Oh, is that it?
Yeah, it's Heartstopper down there, and
Oh, sure.
I had a poster, but it's not that one.
Yeah.
And then Chuck Lee's another LGBTQ.
Nice. Yeah, I think that those graphic novels have really taken over, and it's great. I read a ton of comic books and graphic novels as a kid, whatever there was at the time anyway. I mean, I think when people say to me, what was your inspiration on being a writer? I mean, I could easily make an argument that Peanuts was. I loved Peanuts. I thought Linus was the best. You know, I just loved the way that was written, and it really made me love, especially the wry, humorous written word. And you said you haven't been reading so much recently.
Yeah, I don't have a library card anymore.
Got to get a library.
I know, I don't have an ID for it yet.
Oh gosh, you're gonna have to get one. Okay.
Yeah, my mom's car is broken down, so I took the bus here.
Oh, okay, nice. I'm glad you came.
I know.
You know that we needn't sit here If there's nothing else, I'm happy to let you all be, but if there are any other questions.
I'll say that since you brought up the Heartstoppers, like as I read those, I loved diving into the beginning because they were lighthearted and I don't want to say silly, but it gave you all of that happy feelings. And then as they went on, that's when they started truly tackling the more serious content. And this is what people in the LGBT community deal with on a daily basis. How hard is it for you to write an LGBT novel, but still keep at least some lightheartedness in it?
Well, boy, this sounds horn tooting, sorry. So the book, Openly Straight, won a couple awards. One of them was the Sid Fleischman Award for humor. So it is a humorous novel. I naturally gravitate to humor when dealing with difficult things. I don't want to call The Bridge a funny book, it's dark, but there is humor in it. I think we have to. I mean, I don't think that we can talk about these heavy issues without a little bit of lightness. And personally, as a reader and as a writer, I like laughter through tears, and I like tears through laughter. Those things for me are super exciting. It's just emotional release comes from that. And so I am the kind of writer who will take a sad moment and have something happen that's unexpected. Because as a reader, that's what I want. I want to be able to wipe my tears away. I think that it's very doable. I think the only thing I would say about writing humorously in these books is that it has to be good. There's nothing worse than humor that doesn't work. There's nothing worse, and of course that's subjective. But for me, when I read a book that's trying to be funny, I don't enjoy that. It has to actually feel like it's authentic to the characters and appropriate and all of that.
Marco Shiro, another LGBT writer, was talking, I heard him speaking about how he had written humorous, lighthearted. He said the sort of experience he wished he had had growing up, but he got criticism that they weren't heavy and they weren't realistic because they weren't. They didn't have gay pains that he referred to it.
Right. And he wrote Anger is a Gift. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I haven't read it, but it's been on my list for years. And I know it's supposed to be amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a way that some readers and some reviewers see books that are funny and put them in a different category. And I think that's silly. I mean, not to get out of young adult, but there's a book that won the Pulitzer Prize that's a comic novel called Less. And I actually don't think it deserved a Pulitzer Prize, but that's okay. It's a gay book that was funny, and I was appreciative of that. Humor, doing humor well, it takes some chops. It's not something that comes naturally to all people, and I think there's always room for it, personally.
I think the nice thing, when a book is humorous, I think it has a knack for appealing to a wider audience. I've got the people who come to the LGBTQ book club, a couple of them identify as straight, but they're reading the material, they just enjoy because they're good books. It's not just a gay book, it's a good book.
It's a book about people, and some people are straight and some people are not. And so I see in this generation much more ability for people to read outside of their own genre with that, and I love that. I mean, let's just be real. Young women have forever been reading LGBTQ books. Young cis men, not so much. Young cis straight men, not so much. But it's changing, and it's cool to be writing at a time when it's changing, because I can try to put that in my books. I've been trying to write straight characters in a way that's a little different than it's been in the past. I'm a big fan of allies. I think that's part of it. It's just I like. I have a soft spot for people who aren't LGBTQ, who are supportive. So they wind up in my books a lot. And then, of course, the reality exists as well, and not everybody's an ally. I can tell you, I could tell you so many horror stories. We don't want me to do that, but it can be challenging to be authentic in this world where it is still understood that you're supposed to be, I don't even know the words anymore, cis, straight, yeah, cis and straight.
And now,
Yeah, anything else before we close up? It's so nice to meet you. It's nice to meet you. Do you have anything you'd want to ask? Or? Cool. Yeah, that's fine.
Sort of a different kind of question. I know, just talking to young people who are writers here at the library, a lot of them are very enthusiastic about writing, less enthusiastic about selling themselves, so to speak, promoting themselves. There's a lot of anxiety wrapped up in that. How do you deal with that sort of anxiety, those nerves, when it comes to you've written your product, but now putting it in front of the world?
It's hard, and I guess I would say this. Somewhere along the way, it became clear to me that the way to live, the best way to live, was to shine my light brightly. It does not always come naturally to me. I'm an introvert and an extrovert. I don't always, you're just an introvert, yeah. And especially for introverts, it's really hard to do that. But this is my one life here. So I better put myself out there and just let that light shine, because when I do, it helps other people. You know, it gives courage to somebody else who might not feel comfortable doing that. And we all have something to shine for.